Alright guys, part 2. At the end of the last video you heard me say darn it because I wanted my first two examples to be lines that go into different quadrants so we could practice both of our different quadrants tricks. So I changed this one to -9 because now this goes into different quadrants and it will be able to use the absolute value trick. I'm going to wait till we get into the later examples before I do anything more complicated. So we don't have a grid here, so we can't just count the squares this time. So we're just going to have to use our absolute value trick. Now you're like, Mr. J, if I don't have the grid in front of me, how can I tell if they're in different quadrants? In this example, it's really easy to see because it crosses this line. It clearly goes from quadrant 1 to quadrant 4, so it's really easy to see that they're different quadrants. But with this example, how are you supposed to tell if they're in the same quadrant or different quadrants? And the answer is, look at the signs. If all of these signs are exactly the same between my two pairs, they're in different quadrants. So are these -7s the same? Yes, so far so good. Is this 2 and this -9, do they have the same signs? Well, no, they don't. This is a positive number and this is a negative number. That means the line must cross from one quadrant into the other. Because the signs are different, we know that this line crosses from one quadrant into the other. And this is one of our key points that you guys will write down tomorrow. If both pairs of coordinate points have exactly the same x and y signs, they are in the same quadrant. And we're going to look at some of those later. But look, these do not have all the same signs. These are negative, but this one's positive and this one's negative. They do not have the same signs, which means they are in different quadrants. They're in different quadrants because their signs are not the same. So we know that they're in different quadrants, so we get to use our absolute value trick, and we'll do this again. If they are in different quadrants, determine which coordinate is the same and cross it out. So the -7s are the ones that are the same, so we'll cross those out. Then circle the number that is different in both coordinate pairs. So we'll circle the number that is different. Then find the absolute value of each number. Let's find the absolute value of 2 and -9. We'll find the absolute value of 2 and we'll find the absolute value of -9. Okay? What now? Find the sum. Okay, we just add these together. So 2 plus 9 is 11. So even though we can't see the grid, we can just use our absolute value trick to see that the distance from 2 to -9 is a total of 11 units. Now, this trick is awesome. We're going to do a bunch of examples when we're in class tomorrow, where we're practicing if they're in different quadrants, you can find their absolute values and find the sum, which means you just add them together. But sometimes they'll be in the same quadrant. Let me show you some examples of ones that are in the same quadrant. E and F are in the same quadrant. And you can tell that E and F are in the same quadrant because they're both in the same area. They're both in the third quadrant. If they're in the same quadrant, because it doesn't really cross any lines, it's a slightly different process. So first, the easy one. If it's on the grid and you want to find the distance between them, you could just count 1, 2, 3, 4 units. But we're going to get ready for our sort of more complicated trick. So instead of just going 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to show you the absolute value trick if they're in the same quadrant. So if they're in the same quadrant, we're going to determine which coordinate is the same and cross it out. I'm going to have to write these coordinates. Let's see. It looks like E is at -8, -8, -6. And it looks like F is at -4, -6. -4, -6. All right. So let's look at which one's the same. It looks like between these two pairs, the -6 is the same, so we'll cross it out. Next, it says circle the number that is different. Well, this is the number that's different. and then write a subtraction expression. So notice the difference. If they're in different quadrants, we add them. But if they're in the same quadrant, to find the distance from this to this, we subtract them. So what is the difference between 8 and 4? Now these are negative numbers and we don't know a lot about those yet. But we just want to know what's the difference between 8 and negative 4. So let's find the absolute value of those. And the difference between 8 and 4 is 4 units. And again, if they're in the same quadrant, we are subtracting them from each other. If they're in different quadrants, we add them to each other. Let's do one more example. And again, we're going to practice this a lot tomorrow all together. Let's find the difference between h and I. Oops, looks like my h got a little cut off. Okay, the difference between h and I. So this is at 2, 2, and this is at 8, 2. Again, this one's not on the grid, so it's kind of hard to visualize. How do we know if this line has two dots that are in the same quadrant or different quadrants? Well, remember, if both pairs of coordinate points have exactly the same x and y signs, they're in the same quadrant. So let's check the signs. That's positive, that's positive, that's positive, that's positive. They all have the same signs, so they are in the same quadrant. So since they're in the same quadrant, we're going to be using these steps. Determine which coordinate is the same and cross it out. The one that's the same is they both have a 2 for the y value. Circle the number that's different in both coordinate pairs. It looks like the number that's different is 8 and 2. Write a subtraction expression. So we're going to find the absolute value of 8 and 2, but this time we'll subtract instead of adding. 8 minus 2 is 6 units. So even though we don't have a coordinate field in front of us, we can see that the distance from this to this is 6. So the main key point I want you to take away, if both pairs of coordinate points have the exact same signs, they're in the same quadrant, and we'll be doing these steps. But if they have different signs, like this is a positive 2 and that's a negative 9, if they have different signs, that means the points are in different quadrants, and we'll be following these steps. Alright guys, we'll do this lesson again tomorrow and do lots more examples at that point.